So we're here at Lombardia, the last monument of the season, and it's the last Category 1 race of this Superclásicos. So it's going to be really important for us to try and make the best teams possible to get the most points. After all, it's 600 points for the winner. If you haven't seen my preview that I did with the Cycling Day, and I was lucky enough to do a preview with him just the other day, then go and check it out on the channel. But let's talk about who we should be selecting. So Pogacar at 32. Of course, probably the last time we are going to see Pogacar in this season, so I think that he is going to be a great pick for most teams. After all, he's just looked sensational in the last two races, Emilia and Levi Vadassin as well, so I think Pogacar is almost an absolute certainty that you have to put him on your team. Alaphilippe, probably not so much. Again, just hasn't looked particularly great recently. Too much of a risk to go putting on your team, as is really Michael Woods. Usually a few years ago, I'd say that Woods would be really good for this, but it's just not his cup of tea this year. There's a lot of descending as well. He hasn't looked quite on fire. Yates is a bit comme ci comme ça, kind of could go either way. He has had some good flashes of form. You know, I think he finished top 10 the other day at Vadassin, but then he also did well at Montreal, I think it was, but just a bit too inconsistent for my liking to really warrant the 24 credits that he is priced at. I think that Valverde at 22 is actually really good for the last race of the veteran, and I do think that he has a pretty good chance of coming in the top 5, probably minimum top 10. He's just looked really good. Obviously he's keen to go out with a bit of a bang, and I think that Movistar have two cars to play, of course, with Mas as well, and I think that Valverde's got a real good shot of doing good in this race, so probably a really good one to try and get onto your teams. Bardet's been very consistent recently, usually always inside the top 20. If you're okay with a pretty much guaranteed top 20, probably go with Bardet. The descending helps him too. DSM will be very much rallied around him, so I'd say that he is also a good pick, probably better than his French counterpart Warren Barguil. Wawa just hasn't quite looked up to scratch recently for some reason, I'm not quite sure why. Fulsang, Hershey, Mohoric, Mollema. I'm not a big fan of either of these, possibly Mollema, as he has won this race in the past and clearly, you know, is making a bit of a kind of last hurrah for this season. I think he might be going to the Japan Cup as well, so Mollema could be a decent one as well. 18-point riders, you know, you've got a plethora of UAE riders who will likely be in support of Pogacar, but Ulissi has certainly done well in this race in the past, as has Formolo. But I do think that it's a bit of a risk putting them on as domestiques. Garcia Cortina won the other day, but I don't expect him to do much here. Nibali, probably not, although the Shark and Messina does usually like this as a bit of a hunting ground. Usually, I mean, well, this time round, I just don't think he's going to really do it. He hasn't had the legs. Vlasov is a bit of a strange one, because I do think that it should be a race that he should do well in, but again, just hasn't looked great recently. He was leading Higuita out the other day, to be fair, at Vadassin, so that wasn't a true indication of his form, possibly, but I am still quite sceptical about Vlasov at 18. I think you've got a good few options at 16, possibly Bettiol, if he can find some good climbing legs, would be a great option for EF and a bit of a differential for some teams. Honore, I think I saw something today that he is like ill or something like that, possibly. Probably want to double check that. Guillaume Martin, again, probably a decent option, but there are some better 16-point riders out there, including Enric Mas and Jonas Vingegaard. Mas, I think, is almost an absolute certainty. You have to put Mas onto your teams. Vingegaard could go either way. You have to remember, yes, he has looked very good at the Croatia race recently, but, and I mean this in the most respectable way, it's the Croatia race. It's not filled with the biggest talent out there. It was kind of a bit of a sandbag, and to be honest with you, I'm not overly confident in how his legs are performing, because he wasn't up against the highest calibre of riders. Martinez, I kind of skipped over, but I think that Martinez could be a decent one, but I think it's more likely they'll be going for Yates, as Martinez has just not looked quite on form recently. In terms of 14-point riders, Higuita finished second, third the other day, so, and again, another good choice for you there. Possibly a good one, considering that Vlasov doesn't look particularly great. Higuita would be a great option. Mollard has been very consistent recently, considering that Gaudu isn't in this race because he hasn't been looking too good. Mollard has stepped up to be essentially the leader at Groupama, or definitely alongside like Stora, a pretty like co-leader. So Mollard, a good one I expect for possibly a top 10, but more than likely a top 15. So a pretty safe one there. Rota at 14 should be doing pretty good at this race. It's the kind of terrain that suits him very well. Kind of similar to like the world champs, I guess, but since the World Champs he hasn't looked particularly good, so bear a bit of caution in mind if you're going to pick Roto. I think that Iran is probably the safest 14-point rider, considering how consistent he has looked recently, and he's certainly a rider that I'm thinking of putting onto my team. I think that he has just found a real good spark of form in this latter part of the season, so Iran probably a good one to be putting onto teams. Paulus, his teammate, could be another good one if you needed a 12-point rider. 10-point riders, the best one by and large is Domenico Pozzovivo. Again, very similar to Iran and Valverde, these veterans seem to be coming into some really good form in the latter part of the season, so Pozzovivo as well I would be recommending strongly for you to put onto your teams. Stora as well has looked pretty decent recently as well, probably to finish inside the top 20 in this race. I think that's certainly very possible. 8-point riders, possibly Ben Tullett for Ineos. He did do pretty good at the World Championships, and considering the question marks over Danny Martinez, it's certainly possible that Tullett could finish fairly high up in this race. I think he's got the capabilities of doing that. 6-point rider's got a couple of good ones. Arensman, not a proven one-day race, but certainly a good enough climber where he could surprise on his day. Cone Bauman has a surprisingly fast finish, and I think that if Vingegaard fails, Bauman could certainly be a decent card to play. Lorenzo Fortunato is most likely the best 6-pointer that you could go with. He's looked really good recently. I especially think back to Giro dell'Emilia where he was incredibly good there, so Fortunato is a good one for 6 as well. And then other than that, possibly Leknesund, but I'm not overly keen on that pick, to be honest with you. Quentin Pacher, possibly Piccolo, although he hasn't looked that great recently, it must be noted. Carlos Rodriguez at 6 points, again another good option for the Ineos Grenadiers, certainly one who should be finishing inside the top 20. Skelmers Jensen hasn't looked too great since the World Champs, the last race that he did at Trevay Valacine he got dropped pretty bad, so I'm not massively keen on him as a pick either. Van Wilde and Valter I'm fairly keen on. I think that Van Wilde could have a pretty decent card to play, considering that Alaphilippe and none of the other quick step riders really look particularly great, so he could certainly have some freedom. And then Jay Vine, of course, for Alpecin, looked like fairly sprightly the other day when he was attacking, but it's a little bit of a long shot, I must admit, saying that he will do well in this race. After all, he's never really done a race of this distance before, but he's certainly one who could surprise. And then other than that, I think the best 4-point rider is probably Kevin Vauquelin or Corbin Strong. In terms of a team that I'm thinking of, I think that it's incredibly strong. Basically what I've done is I've picked the top 6 from the Giro dell'Emilia, which is Pogacar, Mas, Valverde, Iran, Pozzovivo and Fortunato. Is an incredibly strong team, got incredible depth, there's not a one weak link, and honestly all of these riders could be finishing inside the top 10. If you wanted to swap some riders around, if you didn't want Valverde, you could put in Vingegaard instead, and then you could use those points on Fortunato and get a 12-point rider, probably somebody like Nielsen Paulus, but I prefer my original team. But put your comments in the comment section down below what teams you're thinking of going with. Are there any riders that I've missed? And yeah, all that's left to say is thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.